My name is Clara Mitchell, and I was 19 when humiliation cut deeper than any wound. The chandeliers blazed above polished marble floors at the North Ridge Country Club in Raleigh, while laughter and the clink of glasses filled the air. It was the 15th wedding anniversary of my mother, Patricia, and my stepfather, Victor. Guests circled them like bees around honey. I stood off to the side in uniform fresh from Fort Bragg, my boots polished, my blouse pressed, yet I felt like a shadow in someone else's celebration. Jake. My stepbrother spotted me. His grin spread wide, not with kindness, but with the pleasure of an easy target. He raised his glass, gestured in my direction, and said loud enough for the crowd to hear, "She is just a soldier barely making minimum wage in uniform." The words struck like a whip. Laughter rippled through the room. My mother lowered her eyes. Victor smirked. My face burned hot while my palms grew damp against the cool glass in my hand. I could hear ice cubes clinking in champagne flutes like a cruel soundtrack to my shame. Then the doors opened. The laughter faltered as Colonel Harris entered with a presence that shifted the room. His eyes locked on mine. He walked forward and the crowd parted unconsciously. My breath caught. He stopped before me, lifted his hand, and gave a sharp salute. His voice carried across the hall, Specialist Clara Mitchell. Silence fell. The same people who had mocked me moments earlier froze their glasses, suspended their mouths half open. My heart pounded, not with shame, but with fierce vindication. And my stepbrother's face drained of color. I grew up in Fayetteville, North Carolina, just outside the gates of Fort Bragg, a place where the rhythm of life often pulsed to the sound of helicopters overhead and the distant echo of artillery practice. Ironically, while I was surrounded by the constant presence of the Army, my own home was a battlefield of a different kind. My mother, Patricia, remarried when I was 12 years old. At first, I thought this was a chance for us to build a stable life after years of scraping by, but stability was not what I got. It was control. Victor Dawson walked into our lives with a polished smile, a booming voice, and the kind of authority that filled every corner of the house. He was a successful contractor who prided himself on running his business and his family with the same firm hand. For a man like him, rules were not suggestions, they were commandments. Within months of the wedding, our house stopped feeling like a home and started to feel like a place where I had to measure every word, every action, every breath. Victor made it clear that his son Jake, who was 2 years older than me, was the sun around which we all revolved. Jake had grown up with private tutors, weekend trips to the coast, and the assurance that every door would open for him with a word from his father. He was already on track for Duke University and later Duke Law School, with every expense covered and every accolade celebrated. I, on the other hand, was treated like a necessary inconvenience. The imbalance was obvious. When Jake brought home an A, Victor praised him with a steak dinner. When I brought home an A, Victor muttered that it was probably an easy class. When Jake needed a new suit for a debate tournament, Victor drove him to Raleigh to buy something tailored. When I needed new running shoes for track, I was told to get a part-time job if I wanted extras. At first, I tried to shrug it off. Maybe this was just how blended families worked, but the more time passed, the clearer it became. There was one golden child, and it wasn't me. Victor's control stretched far beyond favoritism. He dictated how I dressed, who I was allowed to see, even whether I could attend school events. He would say things like, "No daughter of mine is going to waste time at some dance when there are chores to be done," even though I wasn't really his daughter. My mother rarely argued. She had spent years working 2 jobs just to keep us afloat before marrying him, and she clung to the financial security he provided. If it meant looking the other way when he barked orders, she chose silence. By the time I was 14, Victor had mastered the art of making me feel small without ever lifting a hand. A slammed door, a disapproving look, or the way he lowered his voice when he called me ungrateful could pierce deeper than any shout. But sometimes he did shout. He would slam his fist on the dining table so hard the silverware rattled his face, turning red as he demanded to know why I hadn't folded the laundry exactly as he liked, or why I wasn't studying as hard as Jake. The worst night came when I was 16. We were arguing because I wanted to join the junior ROTC program at school. Victor declared it was a waste of time, that no real future existed in playing soldier. His voice rose higher and higher until I tried to walk away. That was when he grabbed my arm and shoved me toward the staircase. I lost my footing, tumbled down, and smacked my shoulder against the railing. The bruise lasted for weeks, a deep purple mark that told a story no one outside the house was ever allowed to hear. When I looked at my mother afterward, hoping for some kind of defense, she just whispered, "Please don't make things harder." From that moment, something hardened inside me. I realized I was not going to be saved. If I wanted a different life, I would have to save myself. Still, I carried the scar of that night not on my skin, but in the constant awareness that I was powerless in my own home. Jake, meanwhile, grew into his role as the golden child with relish. He was charming in public, quick with compliments for neighbors, polite to teachers, and the kind of young man people said would go far. Behind closed doors, he echoed his father's disdain for me. He would laugh when Victor lectured me sometimes, adding his own cutting remarks. "Maybe if you tried harder, Dad wouldn't be so disappointed," he'd say with mock sincerity. Or worse, "You're just jealous because you'll never be as successful as me." By the time Jake graduated high school, Victor hosted a lavish party for him in Raleigh, inviting colleagues, family, friends, and even a local politician. I was tasked with serving hors d'oeuvres as if I were the hired help. When I overheard Victor telling a guest that his son would soon be a lawyer while his stepdaughter was still figuring things out, I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to hide the tears. At 17, I started keeping a notebook under my mattress. In it, I recorded every insult, every moment of rage, every time I was told I wasn't good enough. It wasn't because I planned to show it to anyone. It was because writing the words gave me proof that I wasn't imagining things. Each entry reminded me that one day I would walk away, and when I did, I would never look back. The summer before my senior year of high school, I secretly began researching military enlistment. Fort Bragg had always been in the background of my life. Its soldiers filled the diners on Bragg Boulevard, its paratroopers trained in the skies above Fayetteville, but until then, it had been just another part of the scenery. Suddenly, it became my lifeline. The Army could offer me something no one else could: freedom. Housing, food, a paycheck of my own, and most importantly, distance from Victor's suffocating control. When I finally told my mother I planned to enlist after graduation, she looked stricken. "Clara, you're too young. You don't know what you're signing up for." But Victor just laughed, shaking his head. "She'll never make it. 6 months in, and she'll come crawling back. Mark my words." Jake smirked, adding, "Some of us go to Duke Law, some of us play soldier. Guess we know which of us Dad's proud of." Their words stung, but they also fueled me. I thought, fine, I'll show you. The last year at home was a blur of tension. Every family dinner felt like a tribunal where my choices were mocked and Jake's were celebrated. I learned to keep my head down to nod when Victor spoke to let Jake's boasts roll over me. But at night, I would open my notebook, write down the latest slight, and whisper to myself, "One more year." On graduation day, Victor beamed as Jake, now a college sophomore, came home to watch me walk the stage. As my name was called, I looked out into the crowd. My mother clapped politely. Victor sat with his arms crossed, barely acknowledging me. "And Jake?" He leaned over to the family friend beside him and whispered loud enough for me to read his lips. "She's not going anywhere." My diploma felt like a ticket out, and I clutched it as if it were my passport to freedom. 2 weeks later, I was at the recruiting station signing paperwork. I didn't tell Victor until everything was official. When I did, he smirked and said, "Don't expect us to wait on you when you come crawling back, broke and broken." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. Jake gave me a mock salute and muttered, "Good luck, Private Nobody." I packed my duffel bag and walked out of that house with my notebook tucked inside. The air outside felt different, lighter, even though the road ahead was uncertain. Looking back, those years shaped me more than any drill sergeant ever could. They taught me what it meant to endure humiliation, to live under control, and to be constantly underestimated. They also taught me the hunger for freedom, the fire of independence, and the steel that comes from surviving people who were supposed to love you but chose to belittle you instead. I carried those lessons into the Army. I carried them every time I laced up my boots and every time I pushed myself through exhaustion. And though I didn't know it then, those scars would become the armor I needed for the battles ahead, not the ones overseas, but the ones in banquet halls where family names mattered more than truth, and where a single salute would one day silence a lifetime of doubt. The morning I left Fayetteville for basic training at Fort Jackson in South Carolina is burned into my memory like a scar. The sky was a soft Carolina blue, the kind of clear morning that usually promised summer picnics or beach trips, but for me, it meant escape. My duffel bag was heavy packed with the essentials the recruiter had told me to bring, but the heaviest weight was the silence in the house as I stepped toward the door. My mother stood in the kitchen with her coffee, her eyes watery, her lips pressed tight. Victor sat in his armchair, reading the paper as though nothing significant was happening. Jake, home for a short break before returning to Duke Law, leaned against the counter with that smug half-smile that had haunted me for years. "You'll be back by Christmas," Victor said, not looking up from the newspaper. "Army life isn't for everyone, and it sure isn't for girls who think they can run from responsibility." His words dripped with dismissal. My mother whispered, "Please be safe," but she didn't hug me. Jake added his dagger. "Don't forget to write when you're scrubbing floors, Private Nobody." I tightened my grip on the bag and walked out. For the first time, the air outside felt like freedom. The bus ride to Fort Jackson was filled with nervous chatter from other recruits, most of them 18 or 19 like me. Some talked about girlfriends back home, others about parents who were proud of them. I listened silently, my stomach twisting with a mix of fear and determination. I didn't have proud parents sending me off with hugs. I had sneers and silence. That difference carved a fire in me. If I was going to endure the Army, I would do it without the cushion of approval. Basic training at Fort Jackson hit like a thunderclap. The moment we stepped off the bus drill, sergeants descended like hawks, their voices booming their commands sharp. I had prepared myself mentally, but nothing could have braced me for the chaos of that first night. We were herded, shouted at, stripped of our individuality until we were just recruits in identical fatigues. Some girls cried quietly in the dark. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing Victor's voice mocking me. "You'll never make it." I whispered back into the night, "Watch me." The weeks blurred into sweat exhaustion and relentless pressure. We ran until our lungs burned, marched until our legs ached, and trained until our arms trembled. Yet with each push-up, with each lap around the field, I felt stronger. I remembered every insult Victor and Jake had ever thrown at me. Each repetition was a defiance, each blister a declaration. When my body screamed to quit, my mind replayed Jake's smirk, and suddenly I had energy left. There were nights I doubted myself. During weapons qualification, I struggled at first with the recoil. The rifle felt like it was kicking me back, mocking me for daring to believe I could belong here. I nearly failed the first round. That evening, I sat on my bunk, fists clenched, shame washing over me. For a moment, the old voices crept in. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Then my drill sergeant, a tough woman named Sergeant Flores, stopped by. She saw my frustration and said quietly, "You're not the first to struggle, Mitchell. But I'll tell you something, those who push past it end up the sharpest. I see grit in you. Don't waste it." Her words lit a spark. The next day, I was the first on the range and the last to leave. When qualification came again, I passed with near-perfect marks. Graduation day from basic training was the first day I truly felt proud of myself. Standing in formation, hearing the band play, wearing the uniform that I had sweated and bled to earn it, was a validation that no one could take away. My mother didn't attend. Victor didn't send a card. Jake didn't even acknowledge it. But I didn't need them. I had my fellow soldiers cheering beside me, clapping me on the back, telling me I had earned my place. After Fort Jackson, I received orders to report to Fort Bragg, just a few hours from home, yet a world away in reality. Returning to Fayetteville, not as the powerless teenager trapped under Victor's roof, but as a soldier with a paycheck and purpose, felt surreal. The first time I walked into a diner near post in uniform, people nodded respectfully. A veteran even bought my coffee, patting my shoulder with a quiet, "Proud of you." It was the recognition I had craved all my life, and it came from strangers, not from my family. At Fort Bragg, I threw myself into training. The long marches, the tactical drills, the endless hours of preparation didn't wear me down, they built me. I began to realize that in the Army, your worth wasn't measured by who your father was or what school you went to. It was measured by your grit, your competence, and your reliability. That was a language I could finally speak fluently. It was during a leadership field exercise that I first caught the attention of Colonel Harris. He was overseeing the drill, watching us navigate a simulated combat scenario. My squad had been assigned to secure a mock village, but halfway through the exercise, our team leader froze under pressure. The rest of the squad looked panicked, waiting for orders that never came. Something in me snapped into focus. I stepped up, barked clear instructions, reorganized the team, and pushed us through to finish the objective. We completed the mission on time with efficiency no one had expected from a squad led by a 19-year-old specialist. Afterward, Colonel Harris approached me. He was a tall man with a calm presence, the kind of leader whose authority didn't come from volume but from steadiness. "Mitchell," he said, "you've got instincts. Leadership isn't about age or rank, it's about stepping up when others don't. Remember that." His words sank deep. For the first time, someone in authority had recognized my ability, not dismissed it. From that day, Harris kept an eye on me. He offered advice, asked about my goals, and encouraged me to think beyond just surviving in the Army. "You've got officer potential," he said once almost casually, but the idea planted itself in my mind. Could I really climb that high? Could I be more than just the girl who escaped a toxic home? Back in Fayetteville on weekend passes, nothing had changed in Victor's house. When I walked in wearing my uniform, Victor scoffed. "So they let you play dress-up? How long before you quit?" Jake leaned back in his chair at dinner and added, "She can't even afford rent, still living in barracks like a kid." "Some of us grow up, Clara." My mother sat quietly wringing her hands, unable to bridge the chasm between us. The insults no longer cut as deep, but they still stung. I would retreat to my old room now, cluttered with Patricia's sewing projects, and write in my notebook. One day I scrawled, "I'll stand so tall, they'll have no choice but to look up." Each drill, each mission, each commendation added fuel to that fire. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving in a world that valued my resilience. And the more my family tried to belittle me, the more determined I became to prove them wrong. The Army had become my family. My squad had my back in ways Jake never did. My commanders believed in me in ways Victor never could. For the first time in my life, I was becoming the person I was always meant to be. And yet, despite the pride I felt, there were nights alone in the barracks when doubt crept in. I wondered if I was hiding behind the Army, if maybe Jake was right, that I had chosen this life because I was afraid of civilian responsibility. I questioned whether I would ever be more than just a uniform. But every time the doubt grew too loud, I remembered that staircase that shoved that bruise. I remembered how powerless I had been and how powerful I felt now. I had traded suffocation for air, and I wasn't about to give that up. The day I received my first Army Achievement Medal was the day I stopped doubting completely. Colonel Harris presented it to me after a particularly grueling field exercise where I had kept my team together through storms and fatigue. Standing at attention while he pinned the medal on my chest, I felt a surge of validation stronger than anything Jake's law degree or Victor's business deals could match. My family might never recognize it, but I knew then that my life had meaning. When I left the ceremony medal glinting under the sun, I pulled out my notebook and wrote, "They told me I'd crawl back. Instead, I've learned to stand taller than I ever thought possible." Returning home on weekend passes from Fort Bragg always filled me with conflicting emotions. On one hand, Fayetteville was familiar, the streets I had biked as a child, the corner store where I used to buy candy, the sight of longleaf pines swaying against a Carolina sky. On the other, stepping into Victor's house felt like walking into enemy territory, a place where my uniform stripped away the moment I crossed the threshold, and I was reduced again to the powerless stepdaughter. The first weekend I came home after receiving my Army Achievement Medal, I walked through the front door with my uniform still on. My boots tapped against the tile floor, and for a fleeting second I hoped my mother might smile with pride. Instead, she wiped her hands on a dish towel and glanced nervously toward the living room where Victor sat watching football. His voice boomed before I even stepped into view. "So still wasting your weekends parading around in that costume?" He didn't even look at me when he spoke. Jake, who had come home for the weekend from Raleigh where he was clerking for a law firm, leaned against the banister with a smirk. "She can't even afford an apartment, still living in the barracks like a kid." Some of us are building real lives. I clenched my fists, reminding myself that my medal was in my bag upstairs, proof that my life was more than playing soldier. But what was the point of showing it to people who would only find new ways to mock it? I excused myself and went to my old room, now a clutter of my mother's sewing supplies and Victor's storage boxes. It no longer felt like mine, just borrowed space in a house that reminded me every second I didn't belong. That evening at dinner, the air was thick with tension. Victor dominated the table as usual, discussing business deals in Raleigh and the golf tournament he planned to attend. My mother sat quiet, nodding in all the right places. Jake filled in with stories from his internship at the law firm, careful to highlight his proximity to powerful partners. Then Victor turned his attention to me. "So, Clara," he said, carving into his steak, still doing push-ups and camping out in the mud. "Tell me, when does the Army teach you how to get a real job?" The table chuckled except for my mother, who looked down at her plate. My chest burned. I wanted to tell him about the medal, about Colonel Harris's words, about the recognition I was earning. Instead, I swallowed the anger and answered quietly, "The Army gives me purpose." Jake leaned forward, his grin spreading. "Purpose doesn't pay bills. What's your plan when they're done with you going to work mall security? Maybe you can guard the food court at Cross Creek Mall." His laughter rang sharp in my ears. My fork trembled in my hand. Every insult piled on the years of humiliation, every jab pressing down on scars not yet healed. I excused myself from the table, my appetite gone. Upstairs, I opened my notebook, the one that had traveled with me since high school. I wrote furiously, the ink smudging as my hand shook. "One day, I'll show them I'm not their punching bag." The words steadied me, a vow carved deeper than paper. Over the next months, each visit home was the same cycle. I would arrive hoping things might have changed. Victor would belittle me. Jake would mock me. My mother would remain silent. I endured it because part of me still wanted to believe my family could see me. Truly see me. But with each encounter, my hope thinned. One Sunday afternoon, I came home after a grueling week of field exercises at Fort Bragg. I was exhausted, but proud our squad had been praised for flawless execution. I walked in the door, still in uniform. Victor barely glanced at me before snapping, "Don't track mud on my floor." Jake, lounging on the couch with a law book, smirked. "Shouldn't you be polishing boots or peeling potatoes?" Leave the thinking to people with degrees. Something inside me snapped. "At least I earned my place," I shot back. The room fell silent for a moment. Victor's face darkened. "Watch your tone," he growled. My mother wrung her hands by the doorway, whispering, "Please, let's not fight." I wanted to scream at her to ask why she never defended me, why she let Victor's words slice into me like knives, but the words stuck in my throat. Later that night, lying in my old bed, I stared at the ceiling. My chest ached from the weight of unspoken rage. I thought about Sergeant Flores's encouragement, about Colonel Harris's recognition. They believed in me. Why couldn't my own family? The anger shifted to a sharper edge resolve. If they wouldn't give me respect, I would force them to see it whether they wanted to or not. In the barracks back at Fort Bragg, I found myself training harder than ever. Every mile I ran, I imagined outrunning Victor's voice. Every drill, I pictured Jake's smirk fading when the truth came crashing down. My squad noticed my intensity. "Mitchell, you're a machine," one of them joked after a long ruck march. I only smiled. They didn't know that every step was fueled by years of belittlement, every push-up a silent promise of revenge. One weekend, during a rare quiet dinner, my mother pulled me aside. Her voice trembled as she said, "Clara, can't you try to get along with Victor and Jake? They just want what's best for you." My chest tightened. "Do you even hear yourself, Mom? They tear me down every chance they get. That's not what's best for me." She flinched, tears gathering in her eyes. "Please don't make things harder." That night, I wrote in my notebook, "Even my mother has chosen silence over me. But one day, silence will end. One day, they will all hear my name spoken with respect." The pressure built over months, each insult another stone on the pile. I found myself replaying scenarios in my head, Victor's stunned face, if he ever saw my commendations, Jake's humiliation, if someone important saluted me in front of him. I didn't know then how close those imaginings were to reality, but the anticipation kept me moving forward. The Army continued to recognize my work. I was entrusted with more responsibilities, small leadership tasks that tested my ability to command under stress. Each success carved a deeper divide between the soldier I was becoming and the powerless girl Victor wanted me to remain. At night in the barracks, I thought about that gap. Which version of me was real? The strong soldier or the stepdaughter trapped under Victor's thumb? Slowly, I began to believe the answer was obvious. Still going home meant facing the same battles. One dinner stands out vividly. Jake had just returned from Raleigh, boasting about a new case his firm was handling. Victor beamed with pride. I sat quietly until Jake turned to me with that mocking glint in his eyes. So, Clara still on the government daycare plan. Tell us, how many push-ups did you do today? The table laughed. My stomach churned. I wanted to shout, to throw my medal on the table and watch their faces. Instead, I bit my tongue, saving the moment for when it would matter most. The truth was, I wasn't afraid of their insults anymore. I was biding my time. I knew that sooner or later an opportunity would come. An opportunity to stand so tall they could no longer pretend not to see me. Until then, I endured. I wrote in my notebook, and I trained with a fire they couldn't extinguish. And late at night, when doubt whispered that maybe I was wasting my life, I reminded myself of one thing: I had already escaped their cage. Every day I wore the uniform was proof that I had chosen freedom over control. They could laugh, they could sneer, they could pretend I was nothing. But inside, I knew I was becoming someone they would never be able to dismiss again. The months at Fort Bragg passed in a rhythm of sweat, discipline, and determination. By then, I had grown accustomed to early mornings where the air was still heavy with Carolina humidity, the sound of boots hitting pavement as squads moved in sync, and the occasional roar of aircraft overhead. Every day carried its own challenges, but I attacked each one with a ferocity that surprised even me. For every insult Victor had hurled, for every smirk Jake had thrown my way, I carried the memory like fuel. I was no longer the girl trying to prove herself. I was becoming the soldier who already had. That determination didn't go unnoticed. Colonel Harris, who had first taken an interest in me during the leadership field exercise, began to involve me more closely in tasks that required judgment and initiative. I wasn't an officer not yet, but he treated me as someone who could rise higher than her current rank. He'd ask for my input during training evaluations, challenge me to think beyond the immediate mission, and push me to see the larger picture of military operations. One Friday afternoon, after a particularly grueling week of exercises in the training area, Harris called me into his office. His space was neat, filled with commendations and photographs from deployments overseas, reminders of decades of service. The blinds were half open, casting lines of light across the polished desk. He gestured for me to sit. "Mitchell," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I've been watching you. You don't just follow orders, you think ahead, you adapt, and more importantly, you lead even when it isn't required of you. That's rare." I straightened in my chair, trying to hide the rush of pride in my chest. "Thank you, sir." He nodded slowly. "There's an upcoming recognition ceremony. A few soldiers from this base will be highlighted for exceptional performance. Your name is on the list." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Me, recognition. My mind flashed back to every dinner table insult, every eye roll, every time Jake had said I would amount to nothing. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to speak calmly. "I'm honored, sir." "This isn't just a plaque or a pat on the back," Harris continued. "This is the kind of recognition that can open doors. I want you to be there, and I want you to wear that medal you earned last season." I nodded again, though inside my heart thundered. The idea of being publicly recognized by the Army felt surreal. I thought of Victor scoffing at me, telling me I would crawl back. I thought of Jake's laugh echoing through the house, and I realized that this was the moment I had been waiting for. Not just proof for me, but undeniable proof for them. The date was set. The recognition ceremony would be held on a Saturday evening. When I checked my calendar, my breath caught. That same weekend, Victor and Patricia were hosting their 15th wedding anniversary at the North Ridge Country Club in Raleigh. The thought of those two events colliding filled me with a nervous, electric anticipation. When I mentioned the overlap to Colonel Harris, he raised an eyebrow. "That might actually work in your favor," he said. "What better way to remind your family of who you've become?" I hesitated. The idea of walking into that ballroom still stinging from years of belittlement terrified me. But Harris's words echoed in my mind. What better way indeed? He leaned forward, his voice steady. "Mitchell, you've carried yourself with grit and resilience, but it's time you stop hiding your accomplishments from those who should respect you most. If you'd like, I'll accompany you after the ceremony. Sometimes the presence of rank has a way of silencing doubters." I swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yes, sir. I'd like that." In the weeks leading up to the event, I trained harder than ever, but my thoughts kept circling back to that anniversary party. I imagined Jake holding court among his law firm friends, Victor bragging about business deals, Patricia smiling weakly in her silver gown. I pictured myself walking in with Harris at my side, not as the powerless stepdaughter, but as Specialist Clara Mitchell recognized by the Army itself. The image was intoxicating. At night, I wrote in my notebook, "One day has become this day. They will see me. They will hear my name spoken with respect, and they will never forget it." The Friday before the ceremony, I stopped by my mother's house. Victor was out on the back porch smoking a cigar, while Jake was in the living room on a phone call, his tone smug as always. My mother fluttered around the kitchen, her nerves on edge as she prepared for the party. "Clara," she said softly when she saw me, "are you coming tomorrow?" "Yes," I said simply. Victor overheard and barked a laugh. "Don't embarrass us, Clara. This isn't one of your barracks hangouts. This is a real event with real people." Jake, finishing his call, added, "Try not to wear those boots, sis. Country club floors aren't meant for combat gear." I bit my tongue and said nothing. Inside, my fury simmered, but I knew that words would do nothing. Tomorrow, actions would speak louder than any insult ever could. That night back at Fort Bragg, I laid out my uniform with care. Every ribbon, every pin, every crease had to be perfect. I wanted no one to look at me and dismiss me as sloppy or unworthy. If they were going to see me, they would see me at my sharpest. When the day came, the ceremony at Fort Bragg was everything I had dreamed of and more. Soldiers stood in formation, families filled the auditorium, and the commanding officers spoke of honor, sacrifice, and distinction. When my name was called, I walked across the stage, my boots clicking against the polished floor, and received a plaque and a handshake from the commanding general. The applause was loud, genuine, and it rang in my ears like redemption. Afterward, Harris clapped me on the shoulder. "Ready for round 2?" My pulse raced. "Yes, sir." We left the base together, Harris in his dress uniform, and me still wearing mine. As the lights of Raleigh came into view, my hands trembled slightly on my lap. This was it, the collision of two worlds. The soldier I had become was about to walk straight into the family that had tried to break me. The drive to Raleigh felt both endless and too short. My thoughts raced ahead of me, replaying every insult, every sneer, every moment I had been told I was less. I stared out the window at the passing pines, the familiar Carolina roads I had driven 100 times before, and felt the difference this time. I wasn't the scared teenager sneaking back to a room full of sewing projects. I was a soldier recognized for excellence heading into a ballroom with a colonel at my side. The Northridge Country Club came into view, its facade glowing under warm evening lights. Valets in pressed uniforms waited by the entrance guests in gowns and tailored suits moved gracefully through the doors. My stomach knotted, but Harris's steady presence beside me kept me grounded. "You've faced harder than this," he said quietly as we stepped out of the car. "Remember? You belong here." Inside the ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, silver table settings, and the hum of conversation. Music drifted from a string quartet, mingling with the clinking of glasses. I scanned the room and spotted Victor near the front, shaking hands with a city councilman. Patricia stood beside him in her silver gown, smiling tightly. Jake, in a sharp suit, was surrounded by colleagues from his firm, his laughter carrying across the room. I felt eyes on me the moment I entered. Some guests glanced curiously at my uniform, others whispered behind their hands. Jake noticed me first. His expression flickered with surprise before settling into a smirk. He excused himself from his group and strode over. "Well, look who decided to show up," he said smoothly. His gaze flicked to Harris. "And you brought company?" "This is Colonel Harris," I replied evenly. Jake's eyebrows lifted for a fraction of a second before he covered it with a laugh. "Of course. Always making an entrance, aren't you, Clara? Just don't expect the Colonel to bail you out when the conversation turns to real accomplishments." His voice carried far enough for his colleagues to hear. They chuckled politely, clearly taking their cue from him. I didn't answer. Harris's presence at my shoulder was enough. My silence unnerved Jake more than any retort could have. Across the room, Victor finally noticed us. He excused himself from his conversation and approached his cigar scent trailing behind him. "Clara," he said, his tone edged with disapproval. "You could have at least dressed properly for the occasion." I stood straighter. "This is my proper dress, sir." Before he could reply, Harris spoke, his voice calm but firm. "She's dressed in the uniform of the United States Army. That is as proper as it gets." The words hit Victor like a slap, though he tried to mask it with a forced laugh. Well, we don't want to make too much of a little military hobby, do we?" "This is a party, not boot camp." I clenched my jaw, but Harris's hand on my shoulder reminded me to hold steady. "Excuse me, Colonel," Victor added. "We're just having a bit of family fun." "Family fun shouldn't come at the expense of respect," Harris said simply. Then he turned to me. "Why don't we take a seat?" As the evening unfolded, I found myself drifting through conversations, each one layered with polite condescension. Cousins asked if I was seeing anyone special. A neighbor commented that at least I would have a pension. Rebecca, my cousin, who always seemed eager to advise, leaned in with wine-fueled earnestness. "Clara, you know it's not too late to start over. Find a nice man. Leave the army while you're still young enough." I smiled tightly, each word another stone added to the pile of years of dismissal. But beneath my calm exterior, anticipation thrummed. I knew what was coming. Harris had hinted that he planned to make a point before the night was over. All I had to do was wait. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Jake was in the middle of boasting to a group near the bar, his voice loud, his gestures theatrical. "My sister. She's just a low-ranking soldier. Plays around in the dirt. Meanwhile, I'm handling six-figure cases at the firm." His audience laughed obligingly. Before I could move, Harris stepped forward. "That's an interesting way to describe one of the finest soldiers I've had the privilege of mentoring." His voice was calm, but it cut through the room like a blade. The group fell silent, eyes turning to him. Jake blinked, thrown off balance. "What?" he stammered. Harris nodded toward me. "Specialist Clara Mitchell, commended for exceptional leadership and performance. Recognized by the commanding general himself earlier today." His words carried reaching ears across the ballroom. Conversation's stilled heads turned silence, spread like ripples in water. I felt the air shift, the weight of 100 eyes settling on me. Not with pity this time, but with something else. Curiosity, respect, disbelief. My chest swelled, my pulse pounding. Jake's face drained of color. His smirk faltered, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for words. His colleagues looked at him, then at me, realization dawning. Victor stiffened his jaw tight, his cigar hand trembling slightly. Patricia pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes wide with something that looked dangerously close to tears. And me. I stood tall, my uniform crisp, my chin high. For once, I didn't shrink. I didn't hide. I let them see me, every ribbon, every pin, every ounce of the soldier they had dismissed. The silence deepened until it was broken by Harris's next words, steady and undeniable. "Respect is earned, and Specialist Mitchell has earned it in ways most people in this room cannot even comprehend." It was the moment I had dreamed of, the moment I had written about in the pages of my notebook late at night. The vindication wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, undeniable, and absolute. And in that stillness, as Jake's pale face betrayed the collapse of his arrogance, I knew the balance of power had shifted forever. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Crystal glasses paused mid-air. The quartet faltered into silence, and even the air felt heavy with the weight of what had just been spoken. Colonel Harris's words lingered echoing through the chandeliers like a verdict handed down in a courtroom. Respect is earned, and Specialist Mitchell has earned it in ways most people in this room cannot even comprehend. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it. Years of dismissal had conditioned me to believe that no matter what I did, my family's voices would drown me out. But the silence around me was real, pressing in from all sides, and in that silence, I felt something I had never felt in this house of mirrors and moneyed smiles power. Jake was the first to move. He laughed brittle and too loud as though he could shatter the tension by sheer force of ego. "Well, let's not get carried away," he said, his eyes darting nervously toward his colleagues. "Clara's done a fine job, of course, but we're just talking about training exercises, right?" Nothing compared to what Harris interrupted smoothly. His tone was controlled, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "To sitting in an office, to drafting contracts. Your sister leads soldiers. She's carried responsibility for lives, responsibility most of you can't even imagine." Gasps murmured through the crowd. Jake's bravado cracked further. His cheeks flushed red, his lips twitching into a smile that never reached his eyes. Victor stepped in, then his voice booming like it always had at the dinner table. "All right, that's enough. We don't need to make a spectacle here. This is a family matter." He shot me a glare sharp enough to cut. "Clara, apologize for this interruption. You're embarrassing your mother." "Embarrassing my mother?" The words stung not because I believed them, but because they were so familiar. That was always Victor's line anytime he wanted me silent, anytime he wanted to sweep cruelty under the rug. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears, her lips trembling, but she said nothing. Before I could speak, Harris straightened to his full height, his presence commanding the space. "Specialist Mitchell has nothing to apologize for. If anything, the embarrassment lies in the fact that her achievements have gone unrecognized by her own family for far too long." The crowd shifted, whispers breaking like waves across the room. I caught fragments. "She's a specialist. Commendations extraordinary for someone her age." The pity I had seen so many times before was gone, replaced with curiosity, even admiration. My chest swelled, but beneath the pride was a knot of rage. Not at the strangers now gawking at me, but at the two men whose contempt had defined my entire life. I had dreamed of this moment for years, dreamed of watching their power unravel in front of witnesses. And now it was happening. Jake tried again, his voice tighter. "Let's not exaggerate. My sister does her best, but she's not a hero." He turned toward his colleagues, desperate for validation. "We all know the Army hands out medals like candy. It doesn't mean she's accomplished more than people who build real careers." The words were meant to sting, but instead Harris let out a quiet laugh. It wasn't mocking, it was pitying. "Young man, I've been in uniform for 3 decades. I've seen heroes, and I've buried them. And I assure you, nothing about Specialist Mitchell's record is handed out like candy." The silence returned heavier this time. Jake's face crumpled pale beneath the chandeliers. His colleagues stared at him, their expressions shifting from indulgence to disbelief. Patricia, standing a few feet away, looked stricken. Her silver gown glittered, but her face was ashen. For the first time, her eyes met mine not with dismissal, but with something closer to fear. The band of humiliation tightened around Victor. He barked, his voice desperate. "That's enough out of you, Colonel. You don't come into my family's party and tell us who deserves respect." Harris didn't flinch. "Respect isn't yours to grant or withhold, Mr. Langley. It's earned, and your stepdaughter has earned it in ways your money or influence never could." The words landed like thunder. A hush fell again, followed by murmurs swelling like a tide. Guests turned away from Victor, their eyes cutting into him with thinly veiled judgment. A councilman whispered something to his wife, and she shook her head slowly, her eyes fixed on me. The shift was palpable. Victor's authority, so absolute in the walls of his house, meant nothing here. My breath came fast. The fury I had carried for years rose like a wave, and for once I didn't push it down. I stepped forward, my voice clear enough to slice through the air. "All my life you told me I was nothing. You mocked me for choosing the Army, for building a life you couldn't control. You shoved me down literally and figuratively every chance you had. But tonight, you don't get to control the story anymore." Gasps rippled through the room. My words sharper than any blade hung in the air. Victor's face turned crimson, his jaw clenching as if he could crush the sound out of existence. Jake shifted uncomfortably, his colleagues watching him like sharks scenting blood. I turned my gaze on Jake, my voice steady though my heart hammered. "And you? You've spent years sneering at me from your ivory tower. But you didn't earn your respect. You were handed it. You've never had to fight for your place, never had to bleed for it. Every ounce of respect I have, I carved out myself." Jake swallowed his Adam's apple bobbing. His smirk was gone. His colleagues no longer laughed. One of them, a tall man with graying hair, murmured under his breath, "She's right." The tide had turned. For years, I had dreamed of vindication, and here it was not in whispered apologies or empty gestures, but in the public collapse of the illusions Victor and Jake had built. The ballroom had become my battlefield, and for the first time, I was winning. Patricia stepped forward, then her voice shaking. "Clara," she whispered, I didn't know." Her eyes glistened with tears, her hands clutching the silver fabric of her dress. 1,000 retorts rushed to my lips. "Of course you knew, you just chose not to see. You chose silence over me." But I swallowed them. This wasn't about her tears. It was about me standing tall. Harris's voice carried once more calm and resolute. "Tonight, this young woman stands before you, not as the butt of jokes, not as the shadow in the corner, but as a soldier of the United States Army. And whether you choose to respect her or not, the Army does. Her comrades do, and so do I." The applause started slowly, almost hesitant, from the far side of the room. Then it spread soft claps, building into something louder, stronger. Guests who had once looked at me with pity now clapped with genuine respect. The sound rolled across the ballroom like a wave, drowning out Victor's fury and Jake's shame. And in that thunder of hands meeting hands, I felt something I had never felt in that family before vindication. The applause swelled, rolling through the ballroom in waves that neither Victor nor Jake could stop. For a moment, the clapping drowned out every insult, every memory of humiliation. I stood in the center of it, my uniform catching the light, my chest rising with each breath, and I realized that the power had shifted entirely. Jake's colleagues were no longer hanging on his words. They were watching me. Some nodded with respect, others whispered among themselves, but the smirks were gone. Jake's face flushed with panic. His carefully constructed image, golden boy, rising attorney untouchable, was unraveling before his eyes. He tried to recover. Raising his hands, he forced a laugh. All right. Let's not overdo this. Clara has had her moment, and we're all very proud of her. But let's be honest, being a specialist is, well, it's still near the bottom rung, isn't it? She's no officer." His words cut sharp, desperate to regain footing. The room stilled again, but this time the silence was hostile toward him. Harris's gaze hardened, his voice steady. "Rank is earned step by step. Specialist Mitchell has earned every stripe she wears, and she is on track for leadership. You belittle her title because you don't understand it. But every soldier who stands in uniform, no matter their rank, has already given more than most civilians will in a lifetime." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Jake's attempt had backfired. His colleagues exchanged uneasy glances, one of them whispering, "Why would you mock service like that?" Jake's lips tightened, his eyes darting nervously. Victor, never one to surrender, slammed his hand on a nearby table. Silverware rattled and glasses spilled over. "Enough of this circus," he roared. "This is my house. My family and I won't have it turned into a stage for soldiers who think they're heroes just because they follow orders." Gasps erupted. Several guests stepped back, shock written on their faces. A woman whispered, "Did he really just say that Victor's outburst had shattered whatever dignity he still held?" I turned to him, my voice sharp as a blade. "Following orders. You think that's all I do? I've led men and women through drills you couldn't last 5 minutes in. I've been trusted with decisions where hesitation could mean death." "And what have you done?" Victor shouted at a girl half your size, mocked her while you puffed cigars on your porch. The ballroom erupted in murmurs again. Some guests nodded, others folded their arms, their expressions hard. Victor's face darkened to a dangerous red. "Watch your tongue," he growled, stepping closer. Harris moved instantly, placing himself between us. His presence was calm but immovable. "Mr. Langley, if you lay a hand on her, you'll regret it." The words weren't shouted, they didn't need to be. They carried the weight of authority forged in battlefields, not boardrooms. Victor froze, breathing hard, his fists clenched. The guests watched with wide eyes. For years, he had been the bully in his home, the man whose volume silenced opposition. Now he was face to face with someone who couldn't be cowed. Patricia's voice broke through, trembling. "Victor, stop." For the first time, she raised it above a whisper. Tears streaked her face and her hands shook. "Please, just stop." But Victor couldn't stop. His pride had been wounded too deeply. "She's nothing," he spat, pointing at me. "All of you are fools to applaud her. She'll end up broken and forgotten. And when she does, don't come crying back here for help." I stepped forward, my voice steady. "I won't come back. Not for help. Not for approval. Not for anything. Because I don't need you, Victor. I never did." The words landed like a final blow. For years I had dreamed of saying them. The hush that followed was electric, every guest hanging on the tension between us. Victor's chest heaved, but he said nothing. For the first time, his power had no weight. Jake, desperate to salvage something, spoke up. "Let's not be dramatic. Clara's done fine, sure. But we all know the military props people up who can't succeed elsewhere. That's why she chose it." The line snapped something in me. My anger rose hot and sharp. "Do you know what success looks like? Jake? Success is standing in front of people who mocked you your whole life and proving them wrong. Success is being recognized by generals while you cling to your father's approval like a child. You think your law firm respects you. They're watching right now, and all they see is a man trying to tear down his sister because her accomplishments make him feel small." Jake's face crumpled. His colleagues shifted uncomfortably, their admiration evaporating. One of them, the silver-haired Morrison, stepped forward. "Clara, you have my respect," he said, clearly loud enough for the room to hear. Then he turned to Jake, his eyes cold. "You should be ashamed." The words cut deeper than anything I could have said. Jake staggered, his confidence bleeding out. His colleagues drifted away, leaving him standing exposed, humiliated. Patricia sobbed quietly, her hands pressed to her mouth. "Oh, Clara," she whispered, I never realized." I looked at her, my chest heavy. Part of me wanted to lash out to tell her that she had realized but chosen not to act. Another part of me saw the tremble in her shoulders, the regret that seemed to age her in an instant. I said nothing. My silence was louder than any words. Harris leaned close, his voice low but firm. "You've done enough. They've seen you." But I wasn't finished. The years of humiliation deserved more than silence. I raised my voice so everyone could hear. For years, this family tried to make me feel small. But tonight, you've all seen the truth. I'm not the disappointment. I'm not the failure. I am Specialist Clara Mitchell of the United States Army, and I will never again bow to your contempt. Applause roared through the room again, stronger, louder, undeniable. The quartet, uncertain, began to play softly as though to give rhythm to the thunder of hands. I stood tall, my eyes fixed on Victor and Jake, watching their authority crumble in real time. The tide had turned completely, and though I knew the night wasn't over, I had already won. The applause thundered around me, echoing off crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. For years, I had dreamed of this reversal, dreamed of watching Victor's booming confidence falter and Jake's smug grin collapse. Now it was happening in front of dozens of witnesses, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own story. I felt like the one writing it. Jake stood frozen, his colleagues retreating from his side as though his arrogance were contagious. Morrison, the senior partner, shook his head with visible disappointment. Another colleague muttered pathetic under his breath. Jake's shoulders slumped and the color drained from his face. This wasn't just a social embarrassment, it was professional ruin. His credibility with his firm had been shredded in seconds. Victor fared no better. His chest heaved, his cigar long since crushed in his fist. Guests, who once nodded politely at his bluster, now avoided his eyes. A city councilman who had been laughing with him earlier whispered something to his wife, and she pulled her arm away from Victor as if ashamed to be seen near him. The power he wielded so effortlessly at home had no weight here. He was just another angry man exposed under the bright lights of truth. Patricia hovered between us, tears streaking her face, her hands trembling. "Please," she begged softly, "let's not do this here." But her plea was too late. The spectacle had already unfolded and the tide couldn't be pulled back. I felt the moment peak the emotional crescendo I had carried inside for years. I stepped forward, my voice cutting across the applause steady and strong. "This is exactly the place to do it, because you tried to humiliate me in front of others for years. You wanted witnesses to my shame. Now you have witnesses to my strength." A collective murmur swept through the crowd, affirming approving. Victor's jaw clenched, but his voice cracked as he barked. "You ungrateful little." Harris's voice cut him off deep and commanding. "Enough. You don't get to speak to her like that. Not anymore." The colonel's words rang like a gavel, final and indisputable. Guests exchanged glances, some even nodding in agreement. Victor's face twisted with rage, but he was outnumbered, outflanked, and out of power. Jake stumbled forward, his voice desperate now. "Clara, you don't understand." "I was just joking." I turned on him, my anger sharp as glass. "Joking. When you called me worthless, when you said I'd be back begging for a real job, when you told strangers I was playing soldier while you built a real career. That wasn't a joke, Jake. That was cruelty. And tonight, everyone here has seen it for what it is." Jake's lips trembled. His colleagues' stares bore into him, their silence more condemning than any words. He opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. His voice, so loud for so long, was gone. Patricia took a step toward me, her voice breaking. "Clara, I'm sorry. I should have defended you. I was afraid." For a moment, my chest tightened. I had wanted those words for years. But standing here bathed in applause, I realized they no longer mattered. I looked at her gently but firmly. "Fear is a choice, Mom, and you chose silence. I don't hate you for it, but I don't need your apology to move forward." Her tears fell harder, her shoulders collapsing. It was not triumph I felt, but release. Harris's hand rested lightly on my shoulder, grounding me. "Specialist, I think it's time we take our leave. You've made your point." But I wasn't quite finished. I faced the crowd one last time, my voice carrying. "For anyone here who has ever been dismissed, belittled, or mocked by the very people who should have supported you, remember this. Respect isn't handed down by family. It's earned by the life you build, step by step, day by day. Don't wait for their approval. Live so that even their silence can't diminish you." The room erupted again, applause shaking the very air. Guests stood, some clapping harder than before, some even cheering. The sound washed over me like a tide of vindication. Victor and Jake shrank back into the crowd, small men in a room that no longer bowed to them. Patricia sobbed quietly, caught between the ruins of her husband's authority and the rise of her daughter's strength. I straightened my uniform, lifted my chin, and walked toward the exit with Harris at my side. The crowd parted for us, not out of pity this time, but out of respect. I caught fragments of whispers. "Remarkable young woman. Her courage, did you see the colonel salute her?" Every word was a balm against years of wounds. As the doors closed behind us, the noise of the ballroom faded. The cool night air of Raleigh wrapped around me, sharp and refreshing. I took a deep breath and exhaled the years of bitterness that had clung to me like chains. Harris glanced at me, his expression proud but understated. "You handled yourself with dignity. That's the mark of a true leader." I swallowed hard, my throat thick with emotion. "Thank you, sir, for standing with me tonight." He shook his head. "You stood on your own. I just made sure they heard you." We walked to the car, the sound of distant laughter and music drifting faintly from the ballroom behind us. But I knew the real celebration had already taken place. Not theirs, mine. The night my family's power over me finally shattered. And as we drove back toward Fort Bragg, I pressed my forehead to the window, watching the pines blur past under the moonlight. For the first time in my life, I wasn't replaying their insults in my head. I was replaying my own voice, clear, strong, undeniable. I had faced them. I had won. The drive back to Fort Bragg that night was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of shame I'd grown up with. It was the silence of release of a storm finally breaking. My phone buzzed with messages numbers I didn't recognize, cousins and distant relatives who had witnessed the spectacle and suddenly wanted to check in. I ignored them all. For once, I didn't need validation from anyone. The applause still echoed in my chest louder than any message pinging on a screen. But the fallout began the very next morning. Word traveled fast in Raleigh's tight social circles. What happened at the Northridge Country Club wasn't just gossip, it was scandal. Jake's law firm was the first to react. Morrison, the managing partner, had left the party with a thundercloud over his face. By Monday morning, the whispers in the office had hardened into something tangible. Jake called my mother that night, his voice frantic. Patricia repeated the conversation to me later, though she didn't know I had already heard pieces from others. They said I embarrassed the firm, he ranted, pacing his confidence crumbling. Morrison told me clients were disturbed by how I treated Clara. They said my behavior reflected poorly on the firm's integrity. In the cutthroat world of law, reputation was currency, and Jake had burned his in a single evening. He wasn't fired outright, but his promised partnership was suddenly under review. Cases he had been assigned were quietly shifted to other associates. The golden boy image was tarnished, perhaps permanently. Victor's downfall was slower, but just as brutal. He had always thrived on respect, on the illusion that he was a man of influence. But after the party, friends who had once laughed at his jokes began to keep their distance. Business partners canceled golf outings. A city councilman excused himself from a lunch meeting with a vague conflict. The whispers were unrelenting. Did you hear what he said about his stepdaughter? He mocked a soldier at his own party. Unpatriotic. In a state like North Carolina, where military service was honored deeply, Victor's outburst was more than rude. It was unforgivable. His reputation, carefully cultivated over decades, collapsed in weeks. At home, the atmosphere grew tense. Patricia called me one evening, her voice hushed as though afraid Victor might overhear. "He's furious," she whispered. "He blames you for everything. He says you ruined his standing." I sat on the edge of my bunk at Fort Bragg, staring at the metal gleaming faintly on my desk. "He ruined it himself," I said flatly. She sighed, weary. "Maybe. But he'll never see it that way." For once, her words didn't sting. I realized I didn't care whether Victor saw it or not. His approval had been the leash around my throat for too long. Now that leash was gone. Jake tried to reach out directly a week later. My phone buzzed late at night, his number flashing across the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. His voice was strained ragged with desperation. "Clara, listen. I was wrong. Okay, I shouldn't have said those things. You know how I am, I joke too much." I let the silence stretch before replying. "You don't get to call years of cruelty a joke." He stammered. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad. The firm's punishing me. Clients won't look at me the same way. You have to help me, Clara." You could talk to Morris and tell him I exaggerated. I cut him off, my voice, cold. "You spent years tearing me down to make yourself feel taller. You thought my silence meant weakness. Now you want me to save you? No, Jake. That's not my responsibility. Not anymore." The line went quiet. Then he muttered something bitter, but the desperation undercut his words. When the call ended, I felt no guilt. Only clarity. Victor never called me. But Patricia did often. Her messages were filled with apologies, with attempts to rebuild something between us. "I should have defended you. I see that now." She sent small packages, cookies, knitted scarves, things that once might have softened me. I thanked her politely, but I never let myself fall back into the trap of craving her approval. Because the real power shift wasn't in the applause, or in Jake's humiliation, or in Victor's downfall. The real shift was inside me. For the first time, I saw my family for what they were. People whose opinions no longer defined me. At Fort Bragg, life moved forward. Harris pulled me aside one morning after PT. "You carried yourself well, Mitchell," he said. "Not just that night, but afterward. Leadership isn't just about the battlefield. It's about standing firm when it matters most." His words settled deep, more validating than any clapping ballroom, because Harris didn't see me as a victim or a spectacle. He saw me as a soldier, as someone with potential. That meant more than Victor's approval ever could. Still, news of the party lingered in Fayetteville like smoke after a fire. At church, Patricia told me people whispered. Some congratulated her awkwardly on having a daughter so accomplished. Others scolded her for letting Victor humiliate me for years. She didn't know how to answer them. For the first time, she was the one under scrutiny, not me. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had been the family's shame, the one whispered about at gatherings. Now it was them, and I didn't have to lift a finger. The weeks rolled into months, and every ripple from that night at the country club spread wider. Victor's iron grip over the family, the one that had silenced me since childhood, began to weaken in ways he never expected. At home, his temper grew darker. Patricia confided to me during one of her whispered phone calls that he had taken to slamming doors, muttering about betrayal, and spending long evenings alone in his office with a drink. The neighbors noticed. Once they had admired Victor's booming confidence, his cigar-scented presence on the porch. Now they spoke of him in lowered voices. He lost it at that party, one neighbor told another in line at the grocery store. Mocked his own stepdaughter, a soldier. In Fayetteville, where uniforms were part of daily life, that was unforgivable. Even in his business circles, the fallout deepened. A developer pulled out of a project citing concerns about image. Golf partners stopped answering his calls. Victor, who had once strutted into rooms expecting deference, found himself increasingly alone. Patricia told me he grew bitter, blaming me for every lost opportunity. But I didn't flinch. His collapse was his own doing. Jake's punishment was subtler, but no less severe. At his law firm, the damage to his reputation calcified into something permanent. He was passed over for cases that could have made his career. His promised partnership evaporated, replaced by vague assurances that maybe in a few years. Morrison, the managing partner, avoided him in the hallways. Worse clients who had once trusted Jake now requested other attorneys. His arrogance had been his weapon for so long, but stripped of it, he floundered. He tried again to reach me, sending an email full of half-hearted apologies and excuses. "I was jealous," he wrote. "I thought mocking you made me look better. I see now it only made me look small." The words might have stung once, but now they felt hollow. I didn't reply. Patricia's attempts to repair things were more persistent. She sent letters, each one a mixture of apology and longing. "I want to know you again, Clara," she wrote. "I don't want to lose you forever." I read them sometimes with a lump in my throat, but I kept my distance. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about inviting people back into your life. It was about freeing yourself from their hold. And I was finally free. At Fort Bragg, I grew into my new role with a confidence I had never known. Harris continued to mentor me, challenging me with leadership opportunities, testing me in ways that stretched me beyond what I thought possible. I wasn't just surviving in the Army anymore, I was thriving. My comrades respected me not because of what happened at a ballroom in Raleigh, but because of what I proved in the field every single day. And yet echoes of that night lingered inside me. When I ran laps in the humid Carolina mornings, I remembered the sound of applause crashing through chandeliers. When I tightened my boots before a field exercise, I thought of Jake's pale face the moment his smirk finally shattered. Those memories weren't chains, they were fuel reminders of how far I had come. Fallout reached even beyond the family. A local newspaper picked up whispers of the confrontation. They didn't print names, but the story ran under the headline, "Soldier Shamed at Raleigh Gala Earns Standing Ovation." The article praised the unnamed specialist who had turned humiliation into triumph. My squad clipped it and taped it to the barracks wall. I smiled every time I passed it. Meanwhile, Victor's world kept shrinking. Patricia admitted that invitations dried up. He had once loved being at the center of every fundraiser, every dinner, every council meeting. Now silence answered his boasts. "People don't forget," Patricia said softly over the phone. "Especially when it comes to disrespecting the military." Jake, too, carried his humiliation like a shadow. Word spread through Raleigh's legal community. At conferences, whispers followed him. One associate told me later, "Everyone knows about that night." He tore his sister down in public and she stood taller than him. He'll never live it down. The irony was sharp. For years, they had tried to make me the family's embarrassment. Now they were the embarrassment whispered about at every table, and I didn't have to lift another finger. But the true victory wasn't in their downfall, it was in my release. I no longer measured myself by their opinions. I no longer dreamed of proving them wrong, because I already had. And once you've stood in a room of doubters and watched them crumble under the weight of truth, you realize you don't need their recognition at all. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the longleaf pines around Fort Bragg, I sat outside the barracks with my notebook, the same notebook I had once filled with vows of vengeance. I opened to a fresh page and wrote, "I don't need to show them anymore. I've already shown myself." That more than anything was the power reversal. For years they controlled the narrative. Now, I did. And as I closed the notebook, I felt lighter than I had in my entire life. The months after the country club confrontation unfolded like a new chapter written in fresh ink. For the first time since childhood, I woke each morning without the weight of Victor's voice in my head. The barracks at Fort Bragg no longer felt like temporary shelter. They felt like home. My boots by the door, my metal gleaming faintly on the desk, the smell of pine drifting in through the window. All of it grounded me in a life I had built with my own 2 hands. The echoes of that night followed me, of course. Every soldier in my unit had heard some version of the story. Mitchell, the specialist, who silenced her whole family in one night. Some teased me gently, others clapped me on the back, but none of it felt mocking. They respected me not only for what I had done in uniform, but for standing my ground outside of it. What struck me most was how quickly the fear dissolved. For years, I had dreaded going home, had braced myself for the barrage of insults waiting at Victor's table. But now, when I drove through Fayetteville on errands, I felt nothing but detachment. Their house with its manicured lawn and gleaming porch lights no longer loomed like a fortress. It was just a house, a place I didn't need to return to. Patricia still tried to reach me. Letters arrived weekly sometimes with recipes clipped from magazines, sometimes with apologies scrawled in shaky handwriting. "I want to do better," she wrote. "I want to know you before it's too late." I read them sometimes with a lump in my throat, but I never responded. Forgiveness lived quietly in my chest. I had released the anger, but that didn't mean I had to step back into her silence. Jake's downfall became almost a legend in Raleigh. His firm kept him, but only in the most menial roles. The partnership track he had bragged about for years was closed. Colleagues whispered about how the Golden Boy had been exposed by the very sister he mocked. When I heard about it from acquaintances, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a strange kind of pity, not for the man who had mocked me, but for the boy he once was, the boy who might have been my brother if Victor's shadow hadn't poisoned everything. Victor, meanwhile, clung to his crumbling pride. Neighbors told Patricia they rarely saw him outside anymore. When they did, he walked quickly, eyes down, no cigar in hand. In Fayetteville, mocking a soldier wasn't just cruel, it was a kind of social suicide. His collapse was slow, bitter, and entirely of his own making. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The silence that once smothered me had finally wrapped around him instead. My life, on the other hand, expanded. Colonel Harris kept his word about opportunities. Within months, I was selected for advanced leadership training, a program designed to identify future officers. The work was grueling early mornings, long days filled with strategy sessions, tactical exercises, evaluations that tested every ounce of my resilience. But I thrived. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving the Army. I was excelling in it. One afternoon, during a particularly intense leadership exercise, Harris pulled me aside. His expression was serious, but his eyes held pride. "Mitchell, I see where you're heading," he said. "You're not just meant to wear stripes. You're meant to wear bars. Have you thought about applying for OCS?" The words settled into me like seeds in fertile soil. Officer Candidate School. The path to becoming a lieutenant to leading not just squads, but platoons, companies. I had thought about it in the quiet of my notebook, but hearing Harris say it aloud gave it weight. That night, I sat on my bunk and wrote, "They tried to convince me I was small, but the Army sees me as someone who can command. The only voice I need is my own." As the weeks passed, I embraced a new rhythm. Morning runs under the Carolina sky, the cadence of boots hitting pavement, the shouts of drill instructors, all of it wove together into a life that finally felt like mine. I wasn't looking backward anymore. I wasn't measuring myself against Jake's law career or Victor's business deals. I was measuring myself against the soldier I wanted to become. Sometimes late at night, I would drive to the edge of Fort Bragg Park near the training fields and sit under the stars. The pines stretched tall against the dark, and the hum of insects filled the air. In that solitude, I reflected on the girl I had been, the one shoved down staircases, the one mocked at dinner tables, the one who wrote furious promises in a notebook. That girl was still part of me, but she no longer defined me. She had grown into someone who could stand tall under chandeliers and not flinch. I knew there were more battles ahead. The army wasn't easy. Life wasn't easy. But I also knew I would never again walk into a room carrying the weight of my family's contempt. I would walk in as Specialist Clara Mitchell, soon to be Officer Mitchell, a soldier whose worth was undeniable. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. The decision to apply for officer candidate school didn't come lightly. It meant months of preparation evaluations and the possibility of failure. But every challenge I had faced in my family's house, every insult hurled across the dinner table, every bruise of humiliation had prepared me for this. I knew I was ready. The application process itself was demanding. Physical exams, written tests, interviews with commanding officers, all of it designed to break down anyone who wasn't truly committed. Each step I thought of Victor's sneer, Jake's dismissive laugh, Patricia's pitying eyes. Instead of haunting me, those memories fueled me. They became sparks that pushed me harder in training runs, that steadied my hand on written exams, that kept my voice firm during interviews. When the acceptance letter finally came through, I sat on my bunk in stunned silence. Then I laughed. Not a bitter laugh, not the tight sound of defiance, but a free, unburdened laugh. The kind that rises from your chest when you finally realize you don't need anyone else's approval to define your worth. I told Harris first. His handshake was firm, his smile rare but genuine. "I knew you had it in you, Mitchell," he said. "Now prove it." Those words carried more weight than anything my family had ever told me. Patricia heard about it eventually. A letter came trembling with emotion. "I'm proud of you," she wrote. "I wish I had said that sooner. I wish I had fought harder for you." I folded the letter and tucked it into the same notebook where I had once scribbled my vows of vengeance. This time I wrote beneath her words, "Acknowledgement is welcome, but it is not required." Then I closed the notebook and set it aside. The army consumed my days, and I embraced it. The camaraderie, the discipline, the sense of purpose, it filled the spaces where bitterness had once lived. My fellow candidates became my brothers and sisters. A family forged not by blood, but by trust and sweat and shared sacrifice. I didn't look back anymore. The past was behind me, a scar I could acknowledge without reopening. And yet one evening, after a long training day, I found myself driving past Victor's house. The porch light was on. The lawn was trimmed, the curtains drawn. But it felt hollow. A shell of a place where once I had been diminished. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. For the first time, I understood that walking away wasn't weakness. It was strength. As the months passed, I grew into my new role. Leadership didn't just mean giving orders. It meant shouldering responsibility, making decisions that mattered, protecting the lives of others. It was daunting, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time, I saw a future not limited by the shadows of my family, but expanded by my own choices. The night before my commissioning ceremony, I couldn't sleep. I laced up my boots and went for a run across the quiet fields of Fort Bragg. The air was cool, the stars fading as dawn approached. My breath came in steady rhythm, each step carrying me further from the girl I had been. As I crested a hill, the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, spilling gold across the pines. I stopped, hands on my knees, chest heaving, and watched the sky ignite. In that moment, I felt reborn, not as the daughter Victor controlled, not as the stepsister Jake mocked, not even as the soldier my family had pitied. I was an officer in the making, a leader forged by fire, carrying scars that had become strength. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dawn, You do not own me anymore." The wind carried the words away, and I felt lighter than I ever had. 6 months later, I stood in a crisp uniform at my commissioning ceremony, bars gleaming on my shoulders. Harris saluted me first, and as I returned the salute, I thought of the country club, the chandeliers, the frozen faces of my family. That had been the moment they saw me, but this was the moment I saw myself. I knew then the lesson I wanted to share, not just with soldiers, not just with those who had endured toxic families, but with anyone who had ever been diminished by people who should have loved them. Success isn't about recognition. It isn't about silencing your doubters. It's about knowing your worth even when no one else does. My family's mockery had once defined me. Now it was nothing more than an old story, a scar I carried but no longer felt. My real story was just beginning, written in sweat, discipline, and sunrise over Fort Bragg. And if you've ever sat in silence at a table where your worth was dismissed, if you've ever carried scars from words sharper than knives, then know this: you don't need their permission to be great. You don't need their applause to stand tall. All you need is the courage to keep walking, to keep fighting, to keep becoming who you were always meant to be. As the sun rose higher, I felt a surge of certainty. I was Clara Mitchell. I was an officer, and I was free. When I look back on everything I've just told you, I realize the story isn't just about me. It's about anyone who has ever been dismissed, underestimated, or made to feel small in their own home. Maybe you know exactly what that feels like. Maybe you've sat at a dinner table where your achievements didn't matter, where someone else's success overshadowed you no matter how hard you worked. Or maybe you've lived under the control of someone like Victor Loud, demanding, always certain they know better, even as they crush the spirit of those around them. If any part of my journey resonates with you, I want you to pause here and really sit with it. Because what happened to me is a mirror for so many silent battles happening in households across America. Toxic families don't always show their scars in public. Sometimes they wear smiles in photographs, they exchange polite greetings at church, they host backyard barbecues. But behind closed doors, words cut deeper than fists. Silence can feel like a cage. Control can masquerade as love. And if you've carried that, if you've endured that, then you know how heavy it feels. You know how it eats away at your confidence, your sense of worth, your very identity. You know how long the echoes linger, even when you've left the room, even when you've grown up, even when you've tried to start over. So let me ask you, does my story remind you of your own? Have you ever been mocked for the path you chose, whether it was a career, a marriage, a dream you refused to let go of? Have you ever been made to feel like the lesser child while someone else wore the golden crown in your family? I want you to tell me, right here, right now in the comments. Share the words that were thrown at you. Share the moments when you wanted to disappear. Share the ways you fought back or the ways you're still trying to. Because your story matters. Your voice matters. And when we bring those voices together, we build a chorus that can drown out every sneer, every laugh, every smirk that ever tried to silence us. I know some of you might hesitate. Maybe you're thinking, no one wants to hear my story, but I promise you they do. The people watching alongside you right now, the ones nodding their heads, the ones wiping tears from their cheeks, they need to hear it. Because when you tell your truth, you give someone else permission to tell theirs. Think about it. How many years did I sit in silence, letting Victor and Jake define who I was? How many dinners did I endure where I swallowed my anger and bit my tongue? It wasn't until I shared my truth publicly, unmistakably, that I finally reclaimed my power. And you can do the same. So here's my invitation. Drop your story below. Write it out in as much detail as you need. If it's one sentence, that's enough. If it's a whole essay, I'll read it. Tell me what you've survived. Tell me what you've overcome. Tell me what you're still struggling with. And if you found your own version of freedom, whether it was walking away, standing up, or simply choosing peace, share that too. Because this channel, this space, isn't just about my stories. It's about ours. It's about creating a community where people who have been silenced can finally speak, where those who have been mocked can finally stand tall, and where those who have been overlooked can finally be seen. And while you're here, don't just tell your story, listen to others. Read the comments, reply, offer encouragement. Say, I have been there too, because you never know whose life you might change just by acknowledging their pain. Now let me shift gears for a moment and speak directly to you, not as Clara the soldier, but as a woman who has learned some hard truths. If you've connected with this journey, if you've felt that rush of recognition, then I want you to do 3 things. They're simple, but they matter. First, hit that like button. Not for me, for yourself. Because when you do, you're not just boosting a video, you're sending a signal that says, I see myself here. This story speaks to me, and that matters because it tells the platform, people need to hear this. Second, subscribe. Because this isn't the end of the conversation. I have more stories to tell. Some are mine, some belong to others who've trusted me with their pain and their triumphs. Each one carries the same heartbeat and justice, confronted dignity, reclaimed strength, rediscovered. And if this one touched you, the next one will too. Third, share. Think of someone in your life who needs to hear this. Maybe a friend who grew up under a controlling father. Maybe a coworker who's always been dismissed by her family. Maybe even a sibling who never knew what you went through. Send them this video. Say, watch this. It's worth your time. Because sometimes hearing someone else's survival story is the first step toward believing you can survive your own. I know some of you watching are in the thick of it right now. Maybe you're still living under the roof of a man like Victor. Maybe you still sit at a table where your words are twisted, your worth is denied. And maybe you're thinking, it's easy for Clara, she escaped. She found freedom. But I can't. Let me tell you something. You can. Not all at once, not without fear, not without pain, but you can. Every small act of defiance matters. Every boundary you set, every truth you speak, every step you take away from their control is a victory. And for those of you who have already walked away, who have already built a new life, I want you to reflect. Remember where you came from. Remember what you endured, and then celebrate how far you've come. Because survival is not just about making it through. It's about thriving afterward. It's about finding joy where once there was only pain, building connection, where once there was isolation and claiming pride, where once there was only shame. So let me ask again, what's your story? Where were you when someone tried to make you small, and where are you now? Tell me, tell us, because the world needs to hear it. And if you're watching this from somewhere far away, if you're in a small town in the Midwest or a city apartment in New York or a farmhouse in Texas, drop a comment and tell me where you're from. Let's see how far these stories reach. Let's build a map of survivors, of fighters, of people who refused to stay silent. Before I close, I want to leave you with this. My father once told me before Patricia and Victor, before everything changed, that success isn't measured by other people's recognition. At the time, I didn't understand it. I craved approval. I craved acknowledgement. But now I know he was right. Success is measured by the quiet certainty that you are living the life you were meant to live, no matter who sees it, no matter who claps. So take this story, take this lesson and carry it with you. And if it stirs something in you, if it makes you want to share, to connect, to stand taller, then do it right now. Scroll down, leave your comment, hit like, subscribe, share. Be part of this community of resilience and truth. Because the more we speak, the less power silence holds. And the more we share, the stronger we all become. This isn't just my story, it's yours too. And together we can make sure none of us ever feel small again.